Good afternoon, students. Welcome to your political science class. In my last two videos, I have discussed about the formation of the Constituent Assembly. We did a detailed study about the Constituent Assembly and we have also learned about the constitution of our country. Okay. Now, today I am going to begin from the core provision in the philosophy of our constitution. Okay. Now, first comes among the core provision is individual freedom. Individual freedom. This was the first core provision of the Indian Constitution. Actually, students, earlier the Indians were deprived of their individual freedom when the Vernacular Press Act was passed and when the Rowlatt Act was passed. Okay. In fact, Raja Ram Mohan Roy earlier he showed his concern towards this individual freedom, and after Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Tilak, Gokhale, okay, all these people they have also shown their concern towards this individual freedom. So later on, when the constitution was framed, okay, during that time freedom of speech and expression was included. Okay, freedom of speech and expression, this was included in the part 3 of the Indian Constitution, okay, or among the fundamental rights, okay, which is there in part 3 of the Indian Constitution. Okay, it is there in part 3, okay, among the fundamental rights. This has been included so that people can gain individual freedom, okay, under the constitution or under the government. Now, next comes your social justice. Next comes social justice. Okay. Now, when we talk about social justice, the first thing that comes into our mind is liberalism. Okay. Now, India has not only adopted the policy of liberalism, it has, you can say, it has adopted the policy where liberalism is somewhere has been blended with the socialism. So, you can call it a blend of liberalism plus socialism that exists in India. Okay, so for providing social justice to the people, right to equality has been taken up. What has been taken up? Right to equality has been taken up so that people are provided social justice. Okay, actually to overcome the old prejudice method or to overcome the old injustice that has been done to certain group of Indians during the British rule, this initiative has been taken up by the constitution maker. They have kept in mind that somewhere the people of India should be provided with social justice. Okay, for that right to equality is the initiative, or right to equality is the freedom that has been granted to the citizens of India. The third core provision of the Indian Constitution is recognition of diversity and safeguard minority rights. Recognition of diversity and safeguard minority rights. Okay, now see students, India has a very unique blend of diversity where the upper caste and the lower caste, they have been classified on the basis of casteism. Okay, and from the since the medieval time, you can say that this casteism prevails in our society as a caste. Okay, not only that, there has been certain religious discriminations also where the minorities had to face a lot of problem from the majority. Okay, so keeping this thing in mind, keeping the adversities in mind, the makers of our constitution, they have adopted this particular provision, that is the recognition of diversity and safeguarding the minorities, or you can say the makers of our constitution has thought of safeguarding the minority rights, okay, from the French as well as from the German constitution. Okay, now for this several initiatives has been taken since independence, like reservation of seats for the backward classes and in the parliament, in the schools, in universities, in case of job, everything. In fact, several laws and orders has been also passed for the minorities or to encourage the minorities. Okay, next comes secularism. Okay, now last day when I was teaching you about the attributes of the preamble, that time only I told you what is secularism. Now I am repeating it once again today. Okay, now what is secularism, or how does our constitution promote secularism? Actually, see students, in a country like India with a diversified population, we don't have any single religion, or we don't have any official religion of our country. Okay, our country or our constitution does not promote any official religion. It does not promote any single religion. It states that every religion is equal at front of the law. Okay, every individual is equal at front of the law. Not only that, every individual is also equal, or every religion is also equal at front of the law. Okay, so somewhere it also highlights equality. Okay, so this is another core provision of the Indian constitution. Not only that students, in fact our constitution in the part 3, that is in the fundamental rights, the constitution also declares that being a citizen of this country, you are free to practice any religion. Okay, you are independent to practice any sort of religion. Okay, next comes, the next provision is universal adult franchise. Okay, next comes universal adult franchise. Now in your lower classes you have already studied about universal adult franchise. Now this universal adult franchise was adopted after the year 1950. Okay, now when the first election took place in the year 1951, exactly before that, in the year 1950, when the first election commission was set up in India, during that time our first prime minister, that is Jawaharlal Nehru, he took a very bold and very risky decision. Okay, actually what happened, Indian constitution was based on the European structure. Okay, this I told you earlier. But in European countries who gained independence, there was a common problem. First was, all were not given the voting rights. Specifically the women and the were not given voting rights, and only the propertied sections of the society were only given voting rights in most of the countries. This was a common issue that was going on in Europe. Okay, but during that time in India, we had only 15% educated population, whereas the rest all were illiterate, and most of the population were based in the rural side. So keeping that in mind, and to establish a democratic nation, okay, Jawaharlal Nehru took the initiative of introducing universal adult franchise, though it was a very risky and bold decision during that time. Okay, because during that time India was not at all financially strong, and India had several challenges at front of it. The most biggest challenge among it was to establish democracy. Okay, but this universal adult franchise, it was accepted well among the people. And what does this universal adult franchise states? It states that every individual or every adult citizen, irrespective of their caste, creed, gender and religion, they are eligible to vote. Okay, or they are equal before the law, they all are eligible to vote. Is that clear? Now next comes federalism. Federalism. This is another core provision of the Indian Constitution. Now, what does federalism means? See students, there are usually two forms of government. First is unitary government, second is federal government. Okay, what does unitary government means? Unitary government means where there is a single central government, and that particular single central government rules over the whole country. Okay, where the state governments are not independent. But in case of a federalism, what happens? There is a central government and there are several individual state government. Okay, wait, I'm showing you. See, this is a union government. Okay, it's at center. Okay, and these are the state government. Okay, each state has its own government. These are the states, and each state has their own government. Okay, now this union government, they works independently. Okay, they works independently and they works according to the union list. Whereas this state governments also works independently. In spite their state government and their union government, they both works according to different list actually. See, the union government, I told you, they works according to the union list, whereas the state government, they works according to the state list. And they hardly interfere in each other's work. Okay, but in case wherever there is an emergency, that is whenever there is a president rule or whenever a government rule, governor's rule is imposed on the state in case of state emergency, during that time somewhere the state governments, they falls weak. Okay, during that time you can say the central becomes more powerful and they rules over the state government. That is only one condition, that is during the emergency period. Otherwise both the organs are different. Okay, and both the organs, they works independently. The union government, they works according to the union list, they makes laws also according to the union list, and the state government, they makes laws according to the state list. Okay, now what comes next? Next is national identity. National identity. This is another important feature. Okay, or this is another important core provision of the Indian Constitution. So national identity is one of the core provision. And how does the government, it promotes the national identity? Okay, that is through our national flag. Somewhere it shows, highlights our national identity. It's through our similar constitution. Our national identity is highlighted. We all follow the same constitution. Okay, it is through our identity cards. You can call it a passport, you can call it a voter ID card, or you can call it a Aadhaar card. Okay, through all these things and through our national anthem. Okay, all these things somewhere highlights our national identity. Keeping in mind the negativities that India has gone through during the colonial rule, the framers or the makers of our constitution, they have taken up the initiative to represent those negativities in a positive way in our constitution. Okay. Now, apart from the positive sides that we have studied till now about our constitution also has certain limitations. Okay. Now, we are going to study about those limitations. The first limitation that is faced by the Indian Constitution is we have a the first limitation faced by the Indian Constitution is we have a centralized federation. What is the first limitation? It is centralized federation. Now, what does centralized federation means? I told you students that the federal organs, they works, or the provincial organs or the provincial government, they works independently according to the state list, and the union government or the central government, they works according to the state list. But I also told you that during an emergency, when president rule is imposed on the whole country, or whenever in case of a state emergency, a governor rules is imposed on the state, during that time somewhere the federalism falls weak. During that time the state government cannot work individually, and for that reason our constitution, you can see, our country can be also termed as a centralized federation, or rather you can say we have a centralized federation. Now, what is the next limitation of the Indian Constitution? The second limitation is somewhere the makers of the constitution, they have overlooked the representation of the woman in family. They have given more stress over the representation of women in the parliament, representation of the women in the society, but they have somewhere forgotten to talk about the representation of the woman in the family, because you know very well that in the society and somewhere in the family still women are discriminated. So that is one problem. Okay, overlooked or glossed over the representation of women in family. Of women in family. Okay, so this is the second limitation. Now, what is the third limitation of the Constitution? The third limitation of the Constitution is the social and economic rights of the minorities has been included in the directive principles of our country. It has been included in the directive principles of our country. Instead, it should have been highlighted in the fundamental rights of our country, because directive principles are not granted to us by the Constitution, whereas fundamental rights are granted to us. Okay, if your directive principles are challenged, you cannot go to any court of law, but if your fundamental rights are challenged, you can definitely go to your or if you are deprived of your fundamental rights, you can seek the help of judiciary. Okay, so the third limitation is the socio-economic rights of the minorities are included in directive principles instead of fundamental rights. So these are the three limitations. First is centralized federation. Second is it overlooked or it glossed over the representation of women in family. Third is the socio-economic rights of the minorities are included in the directive principles instead of the fundamental rights. So these are the limitations of our constitution. Okay. So students, that's the end of the chapter. So I'll be giving you question answers in PDF related to this chapter. Okay. Thank you.